From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know. A production of iHeartRadio.
Hello, welcome back to the show. My name is Matt.
My name is Noel.
They call me Ben. We're joined as always with our super producer, Paul. Mission Control Decant. Most importantly, you are you. You are here. That makes this the stuff they don't want you to know. Before we begin our exploration this evening, if you have some time, if the spirit so moves you, why not drop us a kind review on your podcast platform of choice? It's a way to vote for us. It's a free vote, and as we'll learn, elections are important.
Free and fair elections in iTunes review form. Yes, we thank you for your service.
That's why Steve Jobs did the whole thing. I mean, elections are kind of a hot topic, to say the least about it, and in some places, they can be downright dangerous. One of the things that human society has always quarreled with is what we call the peaceful transition of power. And you know, here in the United States, it seems like we're continually in one campaign cycle or another. You know, anybody listening, you probably have received crazy cold call text messages proliferating in recent months that just say something in all caps and then also donate money to us.
I had a lovely lady knock on my door on behalf of her husband, who's campaigning for state senate here in Georgia. And I can't remember the tagline, but she signed off with his campaign slogan. And I thought it was very charming. And you know what? I saved the handbill, and I'll probably vote for him just because she was so nice.
You know, I'm into that somehow.
I am too.
If there's somebody I could see around town that I voted for, I'd feel like, I don't know, I did something for real.
I love that. You guys know, I, without disclosing too much personal info, I live walking distance to a library where elections are held. And it's always cool because this is just between us and the millions of us listening along tonight. Those before and also immediately after elections, those candidates just find excuses to hang out at the library.
That's cool.
Is that just so, to your point, Matt, so that they can be seen as a member of the community?
Mm-hmm.
And to be fair, some of them very much are, especially in these local smaller elections. They make a point of being community boosters and showing face and going to those kinds of events.
Mm-hmm. And thanks to a fantastic message from our fellow conspiracy realist, Tay Gray, we have been exploring some strange stuff about elections abroad. When everything works as it should, elections are powerful and positive. They give the public agency. They help us decide how we will be represented domestically and abroad. So with all this power on the table, it's not really surprising that elections are always a ripe subject for conspiracies. In tonight's episode, we're traveling the world to learn why some people are convinced elections have become a tool of war. Here are the facts. All right, let's put on our nerd policy wonk hats.
Can I be a boffin? I want to be a boffin.
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
I love the term boffin.
I know you do.
So to be a policy wonk, first off, you have to have a garish bow tie every time you're on CNN or Fox News or whatever.
Must I? That's not really my style, though. Can I just, I don't know, wear a...
You can still wear the hat, Noel. You just have to also wear the bow tie.
You could also do a bolo.
I do. Thank you. I was looking for alternatives. I love a bolo. I've recently become a Nolo Bolo.
What would you wear, Matt, as a policy wonk?
I would just be completely naked to show my utter transparency.
I've got nothing to hide.
Just don't let them stand up on the Zoom call.
Or do.
Let's really speak to the public.
And the episode's about elections, not erections.
Oh, my bad.
Getting that one out of the way.
That's our 10 minutes off air that we subjected our long-suffering super producer to, all of our election jokes. But voting, though, why is voting important, right?
Well, In democracies, the only way things get done is if there's a big old vote.
Or the appearance thereof.
Hey, now, let's not be cynical here. Democracy works as intended on paper every single time.
Right. Look, we've nailed it there. It sounds like an obvious question, but the answer is quite important. It's mission critical, especially in a functioning democracy. Imagine a world in which, for some reason, every eligible voter in the United States decided to abstain. Just no one voted for president, including the presidential candidates. It was 0-0. That has never happened in an election. And if that did happen, modern society could not move forward. There would be a crisis point. It's such a weird hypothetical that the founding fathers, found themselves in a prisoner's dilemma. Right? People feel like they have to vote, even if they don't want to, because if they don't, then someone else will.
Yeah. Well, we talked about this before. In the previous presidential election in the United States, only 66% of eligible voters voted.
Which is why it was so tight. I mean, it makes sense that seems to be what's happening right now as well. Although we do have the potential for maybe some folks that abstained last time to maybe get out, to the polls because of some sort of new excitement around a particular candidate and party or what have you. But it is interesting that we're seeing these tight margins, and that largely has to do with folks just kind of not making time for it.
Well, I mean, guys, I didn't realize this is from the Pew Research Center, by the way. In the 2018, what they call midterm elections here in the U.S., where if you don't live here, that's when most of the time there are votes for the Senate and the House of Representatives. There's only a turnout of 49%.
Right, because most people in the United States only vote when it's time to vote for the U.S. president, which is wild. But part of that is, we could argue, by insidious design. Here in this country, and indeed in many other countries, there are a lot of powerful people who, for some reason or another, would prefer that you not vote at all. And in the U.S., it is entirely legal to just not do it, to just not participate, because we don't have mandatory voting. 21 countries do, though.
Well, it's just interesting, too, how of that 60%-ish you said in the main election, I'm adding to the problem, the presidential election last cycle, it's about 50-50 split down the middle in terms of who those people support, which just makes it really, really difficult. And you see these, I'm sorry, I'm repeating myself, but it's astonishing how you have margins of thousands of votes that can make all the difference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And sometimes those Chads hang. That's not a dated reference.
A Chad loves to hang.
Yeah. Look, voting laws vary from country to country, but generally speaking, if you want to vote in a country, you are required to be an adult and a citizen in good legal standing. You have to be registered most times, and you have to have documentation to prove it. That's something that becomes incredibly important when we look at the ideas of election interference. I mean, look, also, there are a lot of people in the U.S. who can't vote. Children, felons, depending on the state.
Well, and not to mention many felons, quote unquote, were not able to vote under laws that have since been changed. Right? So people had were disenfranchised for years because maybe a very small margin that led to a felony marijuana possession. And now those laws have been changed, but those people don't really get any recompense for that time that they were not allowed to vote. I'm sorry. It's just very interesting to me, how that led to so many people not being able to vote. So many people largely affected who maybe would have voted in a particular direction. Let's just say.
Think back to the horrors of polling test, right? How on earth is somebody going to be expected to know Mandarin in the rural South? There are insidious attempts, conspiracies, to prevent people from voting. And before this sounds too partisan, that runs across American history. That is an inarguable, inextricable piece of the American experiment, and it's part of why voting is so controversial. The practice of elections often falls short of the theory of elections. Sometimes honest mistakes, especially back before there were more robust methods of accounting for votes. people just might mess up. They might carry the wrong number across the equation.
Can I ask you guys real quick, how do you feel about the idea of mandatory voting? I think based on what we've said thus far, probably would never happen here just because by design, like you said, some folks don't want people to vote. But how do you feel about that? I mean, we're required to like pay taxes. We're required to do certain municipal things as a result of being a citizen. And yet we're not required to exercise that most important, right.
If you could somehow make it simple and easy and secure enough, then yeah, I mean, that would be awesome. There's just a button. There are two buttons you got to push a couple of times, every 4 years or whatever, every 2 years. Sure. But I don't know. I don't think it's ever going to happen.
Don't see it happening.
I have been on record. I am 100% on board with mandatory voting so long as it could be simple and seamless and transparent. And I think answering those three factors is what makes it so difficult for those in power in the U.S. to ever co-sign something like this. I mean, it's strange because, especially if you're a conspiracy realist of a certain age, it's strange because you can see this increasingly divisive political climate, right? To the point where not too long ago, people were concerned there might be a second civil war. Right now, when someone's candidate, their chosen person doesn't win an election, whether it's for president or whether it's for like local city council person or
dog catcher,
right. Then many people, we would say, will immediately allege conspiracy. It's not that the public has spoken. It's not that someone has been honestly outvoted. It's that the system is rigged. And the weirdest thing is people often do have legitimate grievances here. And part of those grievances come from the fact that the U.S. has a weird voting system. They're actually, if you're not from the U.S., we got to just spend a little bit of time, make a little bit of space for this thing. There are two types of voting in presidential elections. In specific, there's the popular vote. That's the one Jane and John Q. Blue Jeans can actually participate in. And then there's the Electoral College, which is its own thing. And it's supposed to be informed by the popular vote. But unless you are an elector for your state, you don't get to choose.
Another weird thing, I've mentioned this guy a lot, and he's been on Daily Zeitgeist before, Jason Pargin. He makes these really great short Instagram videos, and he pointed out that like what's going on right now in the U.S. presidential election with Kamala Harris getting that kind of last minute, switcheroo, the amount of time that she has to campaign is much more along the lines of what happens in other countries, that the election campaigning cycle in the U.S. is really, really bizarrely long, and that you don't see that in other countries. Hadn't really occurred to me, but apparently that's the case.
Yeah. Back to the Electoral College, guys. Do you remember that Key and Peele, like a mini sketch basically that they did where they're playing basketball and Keegan-Michael Key's like, yeah, you got to make sure you vote. And Jordan Peele's like, yeah, okay, I'll vote. Yeah. He's like, because we're going to have our fake vote, the right, public vote, and then it goes to the real vote. He's like, wait, what? And then they explain the Electoral College somewhat.
So we know that the Electoral College, it's what we would call in entertainment a choice. And I hope you can hear the italics there. It is a thing that remains controversial for good reason. And we often forget here in the United States that the U.S. is not the world entire. If you travel across the globe and witness the many other elections in the many other countries, you will find disturbing accusations of conspiracy and corruption on pretty much every single continent other than Antarctica. And the only reason I'm saying other than Antarctica is because we don't have transparency or visibility into, whatever those scientists are voting for. That like they might have accusations of corruption when it comes to, voting on that month's menu, right? And someone's like, you were burying the mac and cheese candidate. We don't know. Possible. So as a result, there's this huge industry of people, a rotating ensemble cast dedicated to election monitoring. And the idea is that with election monitoring, you send a group of independent third-party observers to a country to watch the vote happen, starting, before, like when they're in their version of a campaign season and staying afterwards. And they're supposed to ensure, again, in theory, that a given election is legitimate. Votes are counted accurately. Voters are not intimidated, nor threatened, nor prevented from accessing the polls. They vote their conscience. This is a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful idea. We also know that there are tons of ways to influence elections that are perhaps unethical, but technically legal. The great dark art of electioneering, lobbying groups. We got super PACs here, which is a crazy thing. And then weirdly enough, you guys, I was thinking about this. How bonkers is it that in the United States, celebrity endorsements have become such a big deal? People who are not qualified as, as policy wonks or experts, people who are not super read up, on geopolitical concerns, but they made your favorite album of the past year. So you'll vote the way they say you should vote.
You might just do it because, hey, if they like it, maybe I should. There's something I'm not seeing. Mm-hmm. But there are other ways to mess with elections too. And a lot of it has to do with once you get in power, what other influence can you have on the power mechanisms, so the other levers of government that exist in whatever country you are currently running, which is a big part of what we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah. Hunt the nerds, hunt the judges, right? Control the means of production voting wise. And this is our question. Could a country weaponize another country's voting process? If so, what does that look like? What could it mean for the future? What exactly are zombie monitors?
Ooh, well, I certainly want to know. And we're all going to find out together when we get back from a quick break.
Here's where it gets crazy. All right, let's get in front of it. Sadly, zombie monitors are not, in fact, undead lizards.
Boo.
Yes, and before we get into that, let's kind of define what zombie election monitors are. According to the National Endowment for Democracy, these are monitoring organizations that look like they're legitimate, but they actually are not, and they're willing to, quote, ignore internationally accepted norms about what constitutes free and fair democratic elections in order to create confusion about the authenticity of an election.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Well said. And we've got to dive in. And to do that, we have to learn the larger context at play here, right?
Mm-hmm.
Goes back to what we're talking about, the idea of election interference. You might not know this, folks. The founding fathers of the United States, a super group of absolutely imperfect dudes, one of their primary concerns about threats to the American experiment was that foreign countries would interfere, that foreign powers, and let's be honest, they were mainly worried about European powers, that those powers might interfere with the vote. And they were so worried about this that it influenced how they wrote the Constitution. That's why we've got that one line that sounds kind of un-American without context. You can't be president unless you're a natural born citizen. You have to be born on U.S. soil.
Just to head off at the pass any threat of, some sleeper agent or something like that, right? That's acting on the behalf of other interests.
But thankfully, we've gotten around that because you can have as many advisors from any other country you want to.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You love to see it. Yeah. You can also, of course, be born on a U.S. military installation abroad. That still counts. For people who were following these kind of stories earlier, you know that it sometimes comes up as an idea that people float during an election. I think most notably, or one I remember, was when the actor and later politician Arnold Schwarzenegger, not Norman Schwarzkopf, Arnold Schwarzenegger was able to serve as governor, right, of California, and people wanted him to run for president, so much so that they floated the idea of changing the Constitution. which is a super ambitious concept.
Well, floating and getting it done are two very different things. I sincerely doubt that would get bipartisan support. Doesn't this have to do with that emoluments clause that we've been hearing a lot about in the news over the last handful of years? The idea of not being allowed to accept gifts and, kind of from foreign powers. And I know it's bigger than that, but isn't that the gist?
Yeah, that was one of the other things they were really concerned about. They were concerned that there was vulnerability to bribery, that a very powerful foreign hostile force would be able to essentially buy out the courts or buy out Congress or own a president. And it turns out they were prescient in their concern about foreign interference, because research has proven beyond a shadow of doubt that other countries have spent a lot of time and money attempting to influence elections in the United States, and not always for the reasons we might assume. Because we have to realize that these countries exercising this asymmetric warfare, they don't think of themselves as the bad guys. They think of themselves as what we would call solution-oriented. So Russia and China both waged information war in previous elections. And just this year, as we're recording in the evening of August 30th, 2024, it appears that hackers in Iran, operating under the auspice of the Revolutionary Guard, targeted the Trump campaign. I got to tell you, I think we can all agree, people, especially here in the U.S., often tend to have a knee-jerk reaction to this stuff. Like if you're a fan of the Hillary Clinton campaign, you would dismiss accusations of corruption as fake news. If you were a fan of her opponent, Donald Trump, in that campaign, you would tend to do the same. You would be like, these are the other guys trying to muddy the water. You know what I mean? I know what's what. I'm an informed voter. And this is fertile ground for conspiracies of foreign election interference. I think it's important for us to note that the countries who are doing this, again, they don't see themselves as the bad guys. They don't have the same set of desires or interest as domestic citizens. They're trying to put their finger on the scale for whichever candidate might best suit their geopolitical goals. And that's a very different thing from, let's say, a voter who is worried about inflation or is worried about education, things like that. That doesn't matter to these guys. What matters to them is a much larger horizon of concerns. And so if they have a candidate that they're kind of working against, and that candidate cracks a deal with them and switches sides, then they'll switch sides too, because they just want it to get done. You know what I mean? They just want to control the microchips and so on. Semiconductors.
Careful.
Are you saying politicians don't always believe everything they talk about?
Whoa, FBI. Here he is. It's this one. No, you're right though, Noel. I mean, we also know that countries will conspire behind the scenes with each other. A great example of this would be the 1917 Zimmermann telegram, wherein the foreign minister of Germany at the time, he had his ambassador, he was trying to be slick. He had his ambassador to Mexico send a pitch letter, and they said, hey, if you ally with us, with Germany, against the United States, then, we'll give you a bunch of land that used to be the United States. We're on your side, so help influence opinions, right? And this is, I don't know. I think this is the part where we also have to note, Paul, if we could get a womp womp, perfect. The U.S. is not a paragon of good behavior in this respect. The U.S., in fact, skips past a lot of the tame election interference methods, and they just straight up have killed people and overthrown governments.
Yeah, search our feeds for School of the Americas, if you will, especially on YouTube, and watch the old video there. Really explains that stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Democratically elected leaders, too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they just went for it. There aren't really good guys in geopolitics. And yeah, the founding fathers had no idea how much of a role 21st century technology will play in elections. but they were pretty on point to be worried about all the things that could go wrong. I mean, this is the question, right? Do we think that technology has empowered citizens of countries to vote, or has it made it easier for bad faith actors to interfere? Or is it both? I don't know.
Well, I mean, I know there's always a kind of a reluctance to go full online, like full technology for elections. You know, at least over here, there's always some analog kind of hand counted aspects. You know, to your point, Matt, about like how in this country it probably would be difficult to have mandatory voting, because I don't think they're ever going to just make it online where you don't have to leave the house, because there always needs to be some aspect of the process that is monitored by humans, or at the very least double checked by humans, or some paper ballot aspect.
Let's go back to that 66% of American citizens voted in the previous presidential election. If you know that over 30% of voters pretty much aren't going to vote, and now you're implementing technology pretty heavily and gathering as much information about that 30% of voters that isn't going to vote, couldn't you somehow, behind the scenes, through some back door, make it look as though at least a percentage of that 30% did vote, maybe in favor of your candidate?
How so? Like how would one implement that? Are you talking about through like hacks or through, you know, bad acting? Like what are we talking about?
I'm saying with technology, you are gathering more and more information on the voter.
So I'm glad you brought that up, because that's going back to that question I just asked, right? Is it empowering people with information, or is it empowering bad faith actors with information? Would be another way to phrase this. We know that cyber attacks, InfoWar, well-timed leaks, shout out to WikiLeaks, all this stuff is super affordable for a state actor. And when you deploy it successfully, it yields a huge bang for your buck, right? And people are also, I would argue to that point, people are more vulnerable now to disinformation than they are empowered. Like if you read arguments from U.S. citizens going back decades, just decades, then you'll see that the average person seemed to at least appear to give in-depth answers about public policy, stuff that, no offense, I certainly couldn't answer. If someone had a man on the street interview with me and they were like, what do you find to be the most troubling and or promising things about the new idea of stepping away from the gold standard?
I mean, of course, knowledge is power in theory, but when, you know, you have access to so much, admittedly good information, there almost is this like pushback of flooding that good information with bad information and misleading information. So it's almost like a zero-sum game in a way where, like, yes, we do have access to all this great stuff, but it's also so muddied by all these bad actors flooding it so that it's almost like finding a needle in a haystack sometimes to get the good information.
Guys, I would argue that with the technology, and as that has increased, the usage of different forms of technology, as that's increased, we've seen an increase in the set of talking points that is simply aimed at the other candidate rather than on those actual policies that we're talking about, the things that could be changed or that a populace may want to have changed by having a new person in office. It's altered now to just, well, you can't vote for that person because of X, right? And at least those are the conversations that I've been engaged in where I'm just meeting somebody new and the subject comes up and it's all about, well, don't vote for that person because of whatever thing.
Yeah, because they're a crooked comptroller. The idea too, and I love that we're pointing this out, the idea is weaponization of headlines, right? And the discourse becomes a lot more bread and circuses, a lot more theatrical. I have taught you this phrase, and this phrase is now going to be used as a thought-terminating cliche. So when I say this phrase, you will respond as programmed, right? To either go yay or to go boo.
No more new taxes. Read my lips.
And what he meant, of course, as we said in a previous episode, was no comma. more new taxes. So, because he sure put them in. But I think we're on the same page. There's no reason to assume that these technological trends will do anything but continue as time goes on. And by this point, it's more or less common knowledge. But before we go to our next break, there is another aspect of election interference that does not get as much attention in the West, and it really should. What if you could pretend to monitor elections in other countries throughout the world as a cover for downright evil things? That's what a zombie monitor does.
Yeah, we'll take a quick break, hear a word from our sponsor, and then jump right into that.
All right, let's go to the Africa Center for Strategic Studies. And of course, you're going to hear a lot of fancy, innocuous names here. So please check into all the controlling powers of the institutions we mentioned. There was an excellent article by a guy named Joseph Siegel that references a book by a guy named Samuel Ramani. And Ramani writes about Russia in Africa, resurgent great power or bellicose pretender. And I want to point out, I love the word bellicose. You don't see it used often outside of, United Nations diplomacy stuff. But if you're ever in an argument with one of your friends, accuse them of being bellicose.
It just means like
it's like belligerent,
inflammatory. Yeah. Like you're just always stirring the pot, right?
Ready to fight.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, belligerent, aggro. You could also say provocative. It's basically warlike, and it's just a fancy word that people in the international set prefer to use over hater.
Yeah, man, these bars in Buckhead are feeling really bellicose around 2 a.m.
There it is. So what's brilliant about this argument is that they depict how desperation pushed Russia as a foreign power to pursue unorthodox methods of influencing the African continent. And I don't know about you guys, but I learned a lot about this. I think we had together been doing more and more research when we were learning about the Wagner Group and their adventurism on that continent. But
and we were
adventurism, and I love that term. Right?
It's like bellicose.
Yeah, it's like conquest, basically, is what it means. More or less.
Well, we were also learning a lot about the influence that China was exerting in many countries on the African continent, and for different purposes, but utilizing some of the same methods to make sure they've got people in the right positions to say, okay.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. We'd love for you to have a base of operations here. And you know what? That's a great point. We don't need to take this to the UN.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I don't need to call my senator just because someone's crashing at my house. Let's hang out, bro.
But and China is one of the countries that, at least for my money, I would say is a big financial player in many countries on the African continent.
100%.
What is Russia's role there? How is it different?
It's interesting because Russia, as a state power, is not a big financial player in the region in comparison to, your U.S. or your colonial European powers or China, of course, which is actually China is kind of winning if you're talking about foreign influence. And check out our earlier episode on that a few years ago, which unfortunately remains relevant. Russia was in a pickle. They didn't have a ton of trade prospects. It was interesting to learn that this country is the source of less than 1% of what we would call foreign direct investment in Africa overall. So while Russia has a very big shadow militarily and a very big political shadow and a very big energy production shadow, they don't have a big financial shadow in Africa, at least not officially. So what they decided to do, and they were thinking, all right, we got to pitch these leaders, these kingmakers in this collection of countries. We got to pitch them on being friends with us and letting us explore their resources, quote unquote, letting us also base our military there for more force projection. We're going to take a different path. We're going to be the disruptors. We're going to stick up for any African dictator and we're going to legitimize whatever the hell they're doing.
Dude. Well, what does that mean? That means that if you ever see, let's say, a coup that occurs on the African continent in any country, and pick your country because there have been so many over the past decade, Russia puts its hand up and says, hey, we got your back. No problem. What do you need? What do you need? You guys need some help? We're there for you.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
It does make you wonder a little bit, at least it makes me wonder, when you hear a former president, in an official capacity, just making offhanded remarks about, oh, well, I actually think, that one leader of this dictatorship is a strong leader or something like that. And that leader is being propped up by Russia in this way. And then there are also accusations that same president is being in some way meddled with, right, by Russia. It makes you think. It doesn't mean it's true necessarily. It just feels off to me.
Right. And a big part of these conspiracies does depend on feeling, right? What appears to be the case? How does this seem? And this is where Russia went into deep narrative war. Essentially their argument was anytime someone might criticize Russia or co-signing of corrupt government functions, Russia would pop back in and they would clap back, really. And they would say, hey, you know what, though? The West shouldn't run everything. We're here to help. We support African solutions to African problems. And guess what, you guys? We're not old school colonial powers on this continent. Remember Belgium? Remember France? And then, you can't blame it. Like, obviously that message resonates deeply with many people in these countries who survived colonialism, right? That wasn't too long ago, and it's scary, scary stuff. So that, I think, is a point well made. And if we're exercising empathy, I could totally understand being someone in a post-colonial African country and saying, hey, yeah, I know Russia doesn't get everything right, but at least they're not letting themselves be trod upon by the expansionist West.
Or it doesn't appear as though they're trying to control us outright.
Right. Unless you check out things like the Russia Sphere network, or, to be fair, things like Voice of America.
Mm.
Yeah.
What's that? No, just look it up.
Let's leave those coughs and that silence in. Yeah, look it up. So now we get to zombie election monitoring. The emergent tool that's become quite popular is the idea of sending in what are sometimes euphemistically called low quality election monitors, or more controversially, zombie monitors. And we have a great quote about this from a paper that's free to read online.
That's right. In their article, Zombies Ahead, Explaining the Rise of Low-Quality Election Monitoring, the authors Sarah Sun Bush, Christina Cocchiero, and Laura Prather make the argument that, this is in their words, the number of organizations engaged in high-quality election monitoring has plateaued, but the number of low-quality monitors, commonly known as zombie monitors, has continued to grow.
And again, these are monitors that just they appear to have the same function as what would be a legitimate election monitoring group, but really they've got ulterior motives.
Yeah. And in full disclosure, we are friends with people who work or have worked in Western election monitoring, folks from the Carter Center, which is based here in the United States. And I was personally surprised when I was talking with some of those folks about it. And I said, well, do you think this is another one of our crazy conspiracy things? And they said, no, it is absolutely true. Those people are getting sent on the ground. And as we'll find, there is a cold and brutal logic to doing this. These authoritarian regimes they're sometimes called the Big Five. These countries will send a group, like we're describing, into another country to look at their voting process and claim it is legitimate no matter what happens. So someone gets, 110% of the votes, and then these people are literally paid to go, this is amazing, you guys, democracy, this is what the people want. You can see examples of this in a lot of places that are sometimes described as vassal states, like Southeast Asia and Central Asia are struggling with this.
Yeah, they really are. There is, I think we just have to point out here, there is still space here for election monitoring groups to have influence, even the ones that are super above board or appear that way. There is space for them to have some kind of minor meddling where it is that same deal, make something look legitimate. I think of it like a fixer, right? Like the wolf, like sending in the wolf to make sure this election goes the way we want it or need it to go.
Right.
But I'm not saying that's what they do every time. I'm saying there's space for that, because anytime you have a third party entering in, like a new challenger approaching kind of deal, you have to be at least moderately skeptical of their intentions.
Yeah, 100%. And there's nothing wrong with that. Dare I say, trust but verify? Whip out that old quote, because I think it is applicable here. It's apropos. We see that countries like Cambodia and Myanmar, or obviously Venezuela, and a lot of the stands, Uzbekistan, Azerbaijan, Tajikistan, they're vulnerable to this kind of stuff. And I love that you're pointing out that we should also question the motives of the generally accepted election monitors. Sometimes they have a horse in the race too. It's weird because, and said with great affection, the nerds have been trying to warn the public about this for quite some time. We mentioned the National Endowment for Democracy a little bit earlier. They published basically a banger mixtape, like an academic version of a mixtape about this problem.
Yeah, they did. And I'm just going to point here before we get to that mixtape. It's an argument that we've made on this show many a time. In any of these situations, when one of these election monitoring groups is being deployed, you have to keep in mind, no matter who's deploying it, that person believes that they are fighting in some way for the greater good.
Yes.
It just might be the greater good is if our team is running things, or if our team makes sure the other team doesn't get into power. And it's going to be that way every time in every situation.
Can we just say, too, that, Ben, the mixtape in question also has a banger of a mixtape-esque name. It's called Authoritarianism Goes Global. Subtitle, The Challenge to Democracy. But I could, no doubt, I could see that as actually being the name of a mixtape. But the authors argue that the big five, we've mentioned China, Russia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Venezuela, are all united by this desire to contain the global advance of democracy.
Which, just side note, folks, this has nothing to do with domestic U.S. politics. This has nothing to do with the name of political parties like Republicans or Democrats. This is the concept of a member of the public being able to vote.
Dude, it's Cold War stuff.
It is very much. The Cold War also never ended.
No. That's why it's cold.
That's why it's still cold.
Still in the fridge.
Might be heated up, though. I mean, I love that we're mentioning this because there are other things that are unfamiliar to the public. Something I propose we call our term of the evening, gongos.
That
Like
could
Bongo?
be the name of the rap group that releases the mixtape.
There it is. Yeah.
Kind of like Migos. I don't know. Gongos just sounds like a really sick, like a group, where
Yeah.
everyone's got their own style. I miss those. We don't have enough of those in hip hop.
We need
these
more of
days.
those.
It's like multiple Gone Girls, but they're a group.
Yeah. And they go. And, or it could be a set of bongos you order from Temu.
Mm-hmm. You just never get them.
Oh, it's a stolen set of bongos? Oh, they're gongos.
Anti bongos.
So these are, this lovely little portmanteau comes to us from the idea of NGOs, non-governmental organizations, things like the Red Cross or things like, Greenpeace. It's supposed to be an institution centered on some aspect of humanitarian activity, right?
Yeah.
We want to give people medical treatment.
On their surface, pretty non-controversial, right?
Because they're not governmental. They are not a part of the government. But what happens when a government makes an NGO?
Right. So NGO, let's remember the N term there. And then where's the geo come from? Gongo is a term meaning government organized non-governmental organizations.
Oh,
the
man.
surrealism there.
Dude, NGOs already had such problems. And now we're just reverse engineering them again. Oh, no.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you love to see it, right? Zombie election monitors are part of this toolbox. Sometimes they are from gongos themselves, and it can be pretty difficult for the average person to suss out the ultimate provenance of these gongos. Who actually controls something like, the Organization for Health and Safety in Elections? We freestyled that name, but what's an example of one? Just so people can see how innocuous these sound.
Oh, here's a real one. The IFES, or International Foundation for Electoral Systems.
Oh, type. All right. Above board, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So we also know that, and in the same step that you would create gongos and deploy them, and deployment is the right word. At the same time, you might target actual NGOs as foreign agents, which is, going back to the great debate about things like the Peace Corps and the CIA. You know what I mean?
Dude, yes. I'm going to read this to you guys. This is directly from the International Foundation for Electoral Systems website. It's just to back up that point you made, Ben. Here it says, about IFES advances democracy for a better future. We collaborate with civil society, public institutions, and the private sector to build resilient democracies that deliver for everyone. This is the part. As a global leader in the promotion and protection of democracy, our technical assistance and applied research develop trusted electoral bodies capable of conducting credible elections, effective and accountable governing stakeholders, and it just goes on and on and on. Which they could be great, and you're probably, you might work for them, and you might be an amazing human being and doing good work. It just feels like that thing.
Yeah. And we should also remember, to that brilliant point, a lot of times folks might not know the ultimate boardroom, as it were, for an organization that employs them or has them do, their volunteer gap year or whatever. These groups, when they arrive, the weird thing is often they seem to have little or no track record of election monitoring, at least in the beginning. Sort of like in the Terminator franchise, the original androids were very easy to differentiate from humans, and they just got better and better and better. They're legitimizing corrupt elections. That's the conspiracy. And the tricky part is, we were talking about this a little bit off air. I was saying, if podcasting doesn't work out for us, maybe this could be our new gig. They will straight up hire Western folks as operatives. And this is where we go to a great quote from The Diplomat, written by Casey Michelle.
Right. Westerners brought credence, supposedly. Hailing from democratic nations themselves, it didn't matter whether or not they actually had any experience observing elections. All that mattered was their citizenship. If they had prior political background, all the better. Elections served as one more avenue for these governments to utilize their methods of caviar diplomacy to wine and dine current and former Western politicians into overlooking the electoral shortcomings and cite the progress and transition apparent. Caviar diplomacy, guys. This seems to fit in with that emoluments clause a little bit, doesn't it? I mean, isn't it interesting, though, how it doesn't apply to some people who definitely should? Like, we know Supreme Court justices who arguably are even more powerful than the president. I mean, the president puts them there, but then they really guide the course of policy and laws, at least in this country. And yet they are able to take all kinds of crazy gifts that aren't referred to as bribes.
Right. And the guy at Publix can't even take a tip,
It's weird.
No tips.
Yeah.
It's definitely a concept that has this like pleasant saltiness, but ultimately it tastes fishy to me.
Like caviar. You ever had caviar, guys? It's pretty good.
Yeah. It's okay.
It's not for everybody. It is overrated, but I had some black caviar once, and it actually it's nice on a cracker with a little creme fraiche.
Dude, did you have it on a cutting board? I'm just joking. I'm sorry.
Listen. Yeah, okay. I'm cutting board rich, guys. I'm cutting board rich.
How many do you have?
Well, I've got two really nice wooden ones. One quite bespoke that I bought at an art market, and then I have a bunch of plastic ones that I use for my day-to-day cutting. My daily cutter.
I'm sorry. No, just.
This is too late, Matt. We're already down. We're already down the yellow brick road here, over the rainbow,
guys,
baby.
Guys, also just so you know, a lot of the idea of caviar is, oh gosh, we should do an episode on caviar. Quite honestly,
ooh, yeah.
The idea of caviar diplomacy it's a real thing, and it's something that, to our earlier point, kind of skirts around the idea of these clauses preventing the gift giving, right? Or the potential for bribery, especially when you're talking about a former Western politician, because then you get back into the revolving door of private and public industry. And also, yeah, people in the West objected to this, and they were saying rightly, I don't know, man, I think this election's rigged. There's not any real election where one person gets 98% of the vote or whatever. But the countries doing this, both in the countries sending the zombie monitors and the countries that are engaging in that farce, they don't give a tinker's damn about what the West thinks. This is not, this is a performance. It is not a performance meant for you in the global West. It is meant instead to further oppress the people living under these authoritarian regimes. This way you can say, hey, citizens of this country that I'm the strong man over for, insert this number of years. Look, we're legit. We're what the people want. Everybody voted this way, because we listen to you. And just for one case here, let's look at the 2015 election in Kazakhstan. The zombie monitors there, the president at the time claimed he did get literally 98% of the vote. And he did this while he threw all of his opponents in jail and crushed any independent media, except for a couple Western journalists who happened to monitor the election, and they said it was aces.
Cool. Case closed.
Mm-hmm.
Move on.
Go Nursultan Nazarbayev. That's the guy who won the election. I'm just mentioning his name because I think he has a really fun name.
And 98% of the voters there voted for him, so he must be popular.
There was a journalist from Latvia, a journalist from the United Kingdom. They both hailed the election as legitimate. And here's the kicker. Actual members of U.S. Congress also participated in this grift. Steve Stockman and Robert Wexler, particularly in this election. And Wexler himself had some pretty rich quotes. He said the election is impressive and that the love and affection that people have for this president is most remarkable. And then he could have stopped there, but he didn't.
Yeah, he also said we export 98% of the world's potassium. Oh, wait, no, that's something else.
He did. He said, I don't know of anywhere else in the world today where there is such diversity and yet there seems to be such harmony. No offense, Kazakhstan, but that is not an entirely accurate statement.
It sounds nice, though.
Sounds great, Sell me a bridge while you're at it.
Okay. I don't understand that reference, Ben. I saw it in the outline. This may be off by. What do you mean? I think I just want to know because it sounds clever, but I feel dumb.
It's referencing the old con artist move of finding someone. Like there are multiple real versions of this, but the American folktale version would be someone arrives in a big city for the first time, and they want to make their fortune. And they run into a guy who says something like, oh, you like this Brooklyn Bridge? I happen to own it. And I'll sell it to you right now.
Gotcha. It's sort of a magic beans kind of argument. I mean, in a way.
Yeah.
So I think we can leave all that in because maybe other people have questions about this too.
And quickly, so we're talking about, using these very specific ways of election monitoring to legitimize elections that are not above board, and ways for essentially authoritarian powers to either stay in power or to grasp power, right? But it's usually a staying in power thing when you're using these election monitors. A lot of it goes back to intimidation, either through like warnings. If my party loses, there's going to be a bloodbath, which is something that Venezuelan president that was just reelected, Maduro, said. Basically warned everybody, you better reelect me or there's going to be trouble. You can quell dissent by putting people in jail, as the way we saw Russia do it, right, with Navalny, and who ended up passing away while incarcerated. In Syria, you can do it by quelling dissent through basically state-sponsored violence against people who would vote against you or who would try and get you out of power.
But Matt, I mean, we're seeing those kinds of threats over here. I mean, just in terms of if I don't win the election, then it was rigged and there's going to be a bloodbath. Just saying that's something that was literally said in political discourse.
That's true. Paul Decken did say that to us earlier.
He's a monster.
In an email he sent to the entire company.
Mm-hmm. Still waiting to see how that one pans out. But I'm just saying, it's like, what we have seen in the past as something that only happens in other countries, we're starting to see over here as well. So, I mean, I'm just saying we're not special in some way.
No, for sure. You can read in the New York Times, it's an article titled How Authoritarian Governments Rig Elections to Stay in Power. And if you go through it, you will find that there are all these little ways to manipulate. It doesn't have to be just a threat, right? You can do things like Paraguay, who actually goes and finds indigenous peoples that generally wouldn't just go out and vote on their own, and they will attempt to make large numbers of them vote for a particular person.
It's essentially cooping. Right?
Exactly.
Like when you used to conscript people in places like Chicago to vote.
Well, exactly. Think about some of the stuff that happens in our country.
That's why that I think is one of the big things for us to take away from this exploration of a very real series of conspiracies. We're not talking about a glass house environment. We're talking about a glass planet. These things are rigged in ways that the public is not meant to understand.
Ben, I propose a new not portmanteau, but a squishing together of two aphorisms. Let's call it a glass house half full or glass house half empty scenario.
Love it. Yes.
Don't know what it means? Write in and let us know what you think.
We also know that it's crucial to understand the importance of this bait and switch. It may sound academic. Yes, it may sound like talking about something over the horizon that does not touch you, but it very much does, no matter where you find yourself in this wide world. Because of this is one key thing. When zombie election monitors come out and say an election was legitimate, and then legitimate election monitors come out and say there was something screwy afoot, right? Something's rotten in the state of Denmark. Then the public is far less likely to protest. The public is going to tend to assume that there is respectability. That patina of legitimacy is dangerous in a very real way. This is gaslighting a nation entire, right? And that's something that should keep you up at night.
And it does. And it does.
And it does. We're so fun at parties. Yeah. We know this is still going to continue in the future. It's just such a cost-effective tool of public control. It's such a successful conspiracy. And maybe we end on this. When you see those declarations about elections that sound a little bit too good to be true. Oh, this guy's been in power for 10 plus years and 90+% of the people keep voting for him. Who told us that? Who is saying that and why? Is there some stuff they don't want you to know? The answer, candidly, is usually going to be yes. Unless, of course, you are an authoritarian dictator who would like to contact us with your firsthand experience.
Yeah, have your people call our people. You can do that. You can find us, first of all, on the internet and all the usual social media places of note at the handle Conspiracy Stuff, where we exist on Facebook with our Facebook group. Here's where it gets crazy. On YouTube, where we have video content galore for you to enjoy. And on X, FKA Twitter. On Instagram and TikTok, however, we are Conspiracy Stuff Show.
We have a phone number. Call it and tell us what you think. 1-833-STDWYTK. When you call in, give yourself a cool nickname and let us know if we can use your name and message on the air. If you've got more to say than can fit in that message, why not instead send us a good old-fashioned email? We are
the entities that read every piece of correspondence we receive. Thanks to Big Shucks in particular, thanks to Darcy, thanks to everybody who takes the time to write in. Be aware yet unafraid. Sometimes the void writes back. Play a game with us. Conspiracy at iHeartRadio.com.
Stuff They Don't Want You to Know is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.